Next week, we're going to see a new release of Season 4 of iRacing, and that includes new content, which I'm just going to roll here in the background, but more importantly, we've got some cool release notes. And this, you're not going to see this in the promo material. You're going to have to go to the forums or see a Reddit post. Personally, I'm excited for the overhaul to the GT4 class, but we've got rescans of tracks and a brand new UI interface, which I'm sure many of you guys are playing around with now. But most importantly is under the graphics section, we have the introduction of VR eye tracking. And we need to zoom in here and read the fine print because it's important. You have to use the OpenXR rendering technique as well as an OpenXR headset. And here's a list of potential headsets. I just threw this together from what I saw other people talking about. I have not verified this. Do your own research. The headset and its software needs to support that OpenXR gaze interaction. And guess what? This is still kind of like a beta implementation by iRacing. There are bugs. Back to the requirements, you're also going to need an NVIDIA GPU. This means a GeForce RTX 2000 series or faster. I'll be using an RTX 5070 Ti and 5090 today. Maybe we'll see this introduced for Radeon graphics cards in the future with a new render engine, but as of right now, if you have Radeon, this won't work for you. Eye tracking can have the useful purpose of, say, being a mouse cursor and letting you interact with the menu or your car, but that's not what's going on here. iRacing is using eye tracking to enable dynamic foveated rendering. I talked about fixed foveated rendering in this video with the introduction of quad views. And I gave this example of showing how there's a higher resolution in the middle and it gets blurrier towards the edges. Now, this orange rectangle should really be a square, but that's the idea of what's going on here. This is occurring early within the iRacing pipeline, so there's a lot of advantages, but there's also some disadvantages, and I showed results here, and if you're interested in this, definitely go check out that video, because I was able to measure a CPU burden when you use MVP, or MVR as I called it in the video, quad views, fixed foveated rendering. It's all describing the same concept, and if your CPU is struggling in certain scenes, it will perform worse with this new foveation rendering technique compared to SPS. All of these results are still relevant to dynamic foveated rendering. For example, let's go to the new Roval 2025 layout in a BMW M2. Just a test drive, solo, no one else on circuit. And I've enabled the marker for eye tracking so you can see this blue square, this blue dot dancing around the screen. I know it's hard not to look at it. It's like a cat and a laser pointer, but there is a graph underneath. And when we look at the distribution of frame times, they're identical between fixed and dynamic. Using the exact same iRacing settings, the same hardware, everything's the same. All I've done is enabled dynamic foveated rendering within iRacing, eye tracking, and the Pimax software. And what we see here is exactly the same GPU performance. And this makes sense because we're not actually changing the render workload really. It's still the same demand. We're just changing where that higher quality inner box is that has the most clarity for our vision. So if your CPU is currently struggling in certain scenarios, dynamic foveated rendering probably won't help, just like fixed foveated did not help. If you saw an uplift in GPU performance with fixed foveated rendering, you'll see a similar, if not exactly the same uplift from dynamic. I'm using a Pimax Crystal Super for this testing because it has native eye tracking support, and you can check out my impressions video here. I have seen some users that were unable to get this to work, but they did format Pimax Play and it worked for them, so just, troubleshoot. Now, this headset is set to 90 Hz refreshing, but I'm not convinced that, at least at this point in the first release of this, that the eye tracking is also at 90 Hz. I doubt that'll come across in this video, but it seems like the blue dot is moving at a slower FPS, I guess you could say, compared to the actual image presented in the headset. Is that something you would notice without the blue dot? I'm not sure, but sometimes when I check my mirrors or check a relative or the lap time, it seems like it doesn't update the dot in that location, or at least I didn't notice it. The blue dot is also not exactly where I'm looking, but that could be deliberate by the developers, because otherwise it would be like a sunspot in your vision, and that would be very annoying for testing. So can you spot the difference between fixed foveated rendering and dynamic foveated rendering? Back to back, it's kind of difficult, and of course your eyes are moving in the headset, so it's a bit strange, but maybe I can come up with an example here. Okay, so now I'll try and loop an example of doing this kind of tight corner hairpin where naturally you'd want your eyes to look to the left as you're trying to spot the apex and what's coming. And in this example, I'm not turning my head. I'm trying to keep it as static as possible, just to see if we can notice the difference in quality. So as I look to the left for the dynamic, it should be more blurry to the right. And if you're thinking, dude, I can't tell, I don't blame you. Here's a still image. Look at Coca-Cola. With the fixed rendering in the bottom, we can see that it's just a bit more clear than the top, where it's dynamic because, as you see with the blue dot, my eyes are looking to the left. In this example, I was running at the highest quality for the foveation. So thankfully, iRacing has moved this into the display VR properties, and we can see these two percentages that you can adjust. I was running the footage at 50/50, which means present the highest clarity for the outside ring and the inside ring, but you can adjust these individually, and there's descriptions there. With dynamic or eye tracking enabled, you want to actually reduce the percentage resolution to keep, which is to say the periphery outside of where you're looking is at a lower resolution. So when we adjust that outer resolution quality and we compare the best, which is 0.5, to the lowest, which is 0.25, we see a pretty big shift in the performance times, and this represents a big win for eye tracking with dynamic foveated rendering. Because wherever you look, it's at the ideal quality, so therefore you can just reduce the periphery resolution, and that's the whole point of this. Now, I want to show the image quality comparison. What does it mean to run 0.5 versus 0.25? But I did that testing with AI, and I think it's important to understand what happens when you add AI to the track in a race. I'm still running at 0.5 for both values, but we can clearly see that shift in the CPU frame time to the right. And then when I switch to the GPU, we actually have late performance. Therefore, there were FPS stutters inside the headset because the GPU has slipped past our 11.1 millisecond line, which we need for 90 Hertz. The new Roval, it's challenging to render, without a doubt. And later in this video, actually at the end, I have a Spa multiplayer race at more aggressive settings, but it was easier to render. So let's go back to the Roval and repeat this side-by-side example. Again, dynamics on top, fixed is underneath, and this time we have cars on track. I didn't use a replay for this, maybe I should have. These are two separate AI races, but again, I'm trying to keep my head straight and then just use my eyes. You may also notice that I'm moving my eyes quite a bit, and I think that's normal user experience. Going through the turn, fixed will look blurry to the left, and dynamic will be more clear. And also going through that left-hand turn, we would expect the center or right side of dynamic to be more blurry and fixed to remain clear. I think a still image will be better for YouTube compression. Here is where I think the dynamic is, and here's where I think the fixed foveated region is. The resolution outside of the inner box is blurrier because of this adjustment we made. In my previous example, I had been running it at 50, which meant it was 50% of the full resolution, but in this example, the outside the box region is at 25% of the full resolution. That's why it's more blurry, that's why it's more obvious. This adjustment to the outer periphery resolution has gained us the performance we need to get the GPU basically delivering on-time performance. I mean, there's a couple data points passed. They actually seem to be CPU related, I'm not sure. And once again, there's no difference between fixed and dynamic foveated rendering here. It's the same. In the headset, however, it would look different because with fixed foveated rendering, you have to keep your eyes focused in the middle sweet part of the headset because that's where iRacing would be applying that good quality inner ring. And if you venture your eyes outside of that, it would be blurry. And that just doesn't happen with dynamic enabled because your eyes are being tracked. So what happens if we go the other way and we kind of inverse this so that it's 0.5 on the outside and 0.25 on the inside? I think I can easily spot the top, but for the bottom, not so much. Maybe the inner ring size is about here? Regardless, it's definitely a more crisper image on the bottom because we have the outer resolution at a higher value. And what I can do is I can, basically hit play on this and show them again in motion. Now, unfortunately, the races are quite different, so the car positions are varying in front of us, but it does allow you to do that image comparison of where the clarity zone is based upon where I'm looking, and I think you could probably press pause and get a good understanding of that. This new Charlotte refresh, I mean, it's a busy track, so there's a lot going on, and I don't think the degradation of the periphery quality is that annoying, but if you're at a more simple circuit, big skies, lots of grass, something like that, it might be worse because you're going to be seeing the shifting of this image quality, and it could be quite annoying, even in the periphery of your own vision. But I guess what I find most surprising about this is the performance difference between these two. There isn't much of one. Compared to the best quality of 0.5, the two alternatives are delivering nearly identical performance. I mean, yes, the pink fuchsia 0.5 outer, 0.25 inner, it does drift a little bit past the 90 hertz line, but with AI runs, I mean, that kind of variability will happen. And I'm showing that benchmark run above here, and I think I find it just plain less annoying than having the outer resolution reduced, because I guess when you move your eyes, things change, and it just makes me want to look back to see what changed, and then I end up, chasing my own tail when I do that. So I find this to be perhaps a better compromise for a dynamic eye tracking enabled feature like this foveated rendering. Which then obviously leads to the next question: what if we put both values at their lowest, at both at 0.25? And with that yellow data set, we see a monstrous gain in performance by combining both of those values. Now, the last time I tested that, it was basically unusable. I wouldn't recommend it at all. You were really focused in on this specific sweet spot. Maybe if you had Fresnel lenses and a Valve Index or a Quest 2, that was okay because you're already kind of dialed in the middle of the headset. But let's take a look at it full screen here with the Pimax Crystal. We'll restart the race here. We'll go again from the standing start, and you can see my eyes dart around and things come into and out of focus. It's probably easier just to concentrate on something like the dash and see when it comes out of focus, and then notice where the blue dot is or other parts of the track. It's unpredictable to see where my eyes are looking, that's for sure. But I think this performance gain, this is what we all kind of want to happen when it comes to eye tracking. We want to have just a massive gain in performance because we're rendering a high quality where our eye is looking, and then we're just reducing the quality everywhere else. Gaining performance in gaming always comes at the cost of image quality, and we kind of see this heading towards the grandstands. If you notice, I mean, it's not going to represent itself as well in this capture as it does in the screen, but you can see a shimmering of the fence, you can see a distortion of the crowd. You can notice this inside the headset. But I mean, this is a busy track. I mean, I'm in these battles, so it's not as evident in just a scenario like this. But if you're cruising around 30 minutes into a race, everyone's kind of spaced out, and you're just finding a rhythm, you might take notice of this and be potentially annoyed that yes, there is a degradation of quality out in your periphery. Now that we've established all this baseline knowledge, let's switch out the GPU. Let's switch out the graphics card for a 5070 Ti. This is the MSI Vangaurd edition, but finally, it's taken like 6 months, but we're actually seeing the manufacturers and retailers compete at MSRP that was announced back in February. Right now, I think the 5070 Ti is the best bang for buck VR or triple screen sim racing card you can get. And I'll put some referral links to the cheapest models I can find on Amazon down in the description below. And if you're saying, hey, what about the 9070 XT? Guys, if you're Radeon fans, I'm trying to love that product, but it just doesn't deliver in simulators. That's just the way it is. But even with the 5070 Ti, it's important to set expectations because it's a third the price of a 5090, and delivers about a third of the performance. I mean, the 5090 is bananas. But back to the 5070 Ti, I had to reduce the MSAA to 2 times, and also in this we're running, instead at 0.90 Pimax resolution, we're running at 0.75, so a significant reduction in the overall pixel count. Now, I've kept all the other iRacing settings the same, and we can see that the FPS it isn't stable. We're getting quite a bit of fluctuations here, and it's annoying. I wouldn't want that. And so now let's just kind of show all of them at once, the different foveated rendering qualities, so that you can see what it looks like, performance-wise. So the footage we have above is the yellow data set that's 50% outer resolution with a 25% inner size. It has basically the same performance as the 25 outer, 50 inner. And when we see our big, performance gains is of course going 25-25. And then I show this with both 2 times MSAA and 4 times MSAA. So if we really flex the dynamic eye tracking and we have a blurry periphery and smaller inner ring, which is represented by 25-25, we can just see a tremendous performance gain. The Crystal Super is a very demanding headset, and we've taken a relatively cheaper video card, and we're seeing that we're able to deliver, good on-time performance. But do I recommend this experience? Well, let's go full screen. The gameplay capture we're looking at here is the best performing Fuchsia at 8 millisecond average, 25-25, 2 times MSA. And even just sitting here, I mean, you can see a significant distortion of the periphery because we have not only a lower pixel count, but we've decreased our anti-aliasing. And yeah, I mean, there's going to be an image compromise when we do that. Inside the headset, it kind of looks like a heat haze, like a digital distortion that's going on in your periphery. And yeah, if you're sensitive to that, it can be quite annoying. But I would say it's less annoying than if it was fixed, because at least, again, everywhere you look, it's clear. Whereas if it was a fixed foveation, you could easily look outside of that sweet spot and then you'd just be rewarded with very ugly textures. So at least here it's on the periphery. My general comment when it comes to the Pimax Crystal Super is when you run this low at 0.75, I don't know what it is about the screens. It loses its appeal. It doesn't look as sharp as, for example, a Pimax Crystal Lite at that resolution. If my math is right, a Pimax Crystal Super at 0.75 in the Play software has the total pixel count as a Pimax Crystal Lite at 1.0, but the Crystal Lite at 1.0 just produces a more attractive image than the Super at 0.75. So if I was using a 5070 Ti regularly with a Crystal Super, I would have to make other compromises in the image quality, in the graphic settings or something to try and boost that overall resolution to get a more appealing image from the headset. Keep in mind the Crystal Super does have a sweet spot. So if you send your eyes to the far left or the far right, you're not greeted with the same edge-to-edge clarity like a Quest 3. You can check out my other videos about this and the Pimax lenses. So let's do a summary. Just for something different, I'll put on a week 13 race. Here's Spa GT Force. This was the top split for this time slot. I think it was about 4,000 iRating. I turned off the blue square for this footage because I'm actually driving, but I'm still running 25 outer resolution, 25% inner box size at Pimax Play 1.00 resolution with a Crystal Super. iRacing is using an OpenXR extension to track your eye gaze, so this is allowing for a dynamic foveated rendering instead of fixed, which would just be in the middle. This one's actually tracking where my eyes are and making that part in focus and clear. At least with Pimax, the CPU does not seem to suffer more of a burden running this dynamic nature compared to fixed. It's the same performance. In fact, here's another benchmark. I did a benchmark with the 7600X from Ryzen, and this was in that previous Roval testing, and I wanted to overburden the processor and see, does that change how fixed and dynamic are recorded performance-wise? And as far as I can tell, no, it's the same performance. Maybe with other headsets and other software, there is a CPU impact. I don't know. Here are a list of potential compatible headsets. Do your own research if you don't own one of these before you buy one, and just to make sure it works. This new feature from iRacing is very much in a beta. This is our first time using it, so I expect it to get better over time. At least that's what I hope. I showed several examples that there is no performance gain by just enabling dynamic foveated rendering. It's the same performance as fixed compared to NVIDIA SPS. However, both of these do have a CPU burden. So the only way for dynamic to outperform fixed is to manipulate those two values, which are now included inside the graphics options for the outer resolution and the inner box size. But it is possible to reduce that outer resolution too much, and it could result in some distracting aliasing issues, some distortions in your periphery, and that could be quite annoying actually. However, the performance gains are definitely there if you're able to hunt through the settings and find something that works for you and your headset. In this graph, I'm showing the yellow dataset as the best performance offered by 0.25, compared to the worst performance, which is running at the best quality, which would be 0.5, the white dataset. Perhaps the most interesting use case would be using a otherwise underpowered GPU and leveraging the abilities of dynamic foveated rendering in iRacing to try and get the most out of it and power a high-end headset like the Pimax Crystal Super. And that's where I showed this example with the 5070 Ti and manipulating these values to go from late performance to the right of our 11.1 millisecond timeline to on-time performance and smooth performance by manipulating the outer and inner ring. Now, I would caution you, however, to stick within the sweet spot resolution for your VR headset. If your overall headset resolution is too low, and then iRacing does its pixelation process essentially with the foveated rendering, then it's going to get really grainy and you're going to have distortions and aliasing artifacts in your periphery vision. In this full screen example, which is getting a little spicy here, this is running Pimax at its, now I call it native resolution, it's 1.00, but this is what Pimax determines to be the ideal resolution for the headset. So running 25 outer, 25 inner isn't really much of a deal. I did not notice it, honestly, during this race. It was great. But if I backed off the overall resolution to say 0.75 in Pimax Play, significantly reducing the overall resolution, I would have found the distortion to be more annoying, like I had previously shown in this video. So there are some alternative ways to go about integrating an OpenXR eye tracking through some mods, through some GitHub downloads, things like that. I have not experimented with that. What I was just focused on today is what's directly supported by iRacing and through the headset. I hear that the PSVR2 integration is still not quite there. It's still a bit buggy, but I only have one headset for eye tracking, and that's the Crystal Super. Speaking of Pimax, I would be remiss if I did not mention that they have an expansion on their upgrade program where if you have an older headset and you'd like to get a Crystal Lite or Crystal Super, you can either get a discount or you can get lens inserts and the DMAS headphones. I was using the Hans VR lens inserts to match my prescription, and that's what made all of this testing possible, actually. So I will do a separate video, just something quick, to show what it looks like to use those and what my experience has been like. If you go with a Pimax headset, you can support my channel by selecting Benchmark Odysseys when it gets prompted, or use some of the referral links below. Reach out to me if it doesn't make any sense. If you're not into that, you can also support me through Buy Me a Coffee or Patreon. And of course, YouTube, super thanks, thumbs up, comments, stuff like that. Also, if you think benchmarking is cool and you would like to partake, I would encourage you to sign up to my Patreon, because I'm trying to develop a tool and a process so that we can all do it together and share our results. So if you'd like to be a beta tester, I encourage you to sign up. I'm probably a few weeks away from making it available. And if you're curious what the CPU performance was during this multiplayer race, here's the frame time chart for that. That's with 3 cockpit mirrors, which is pretty impressive. And then the GPU chart, again, benefiting from the 2525, it looks great, especially at this high resolution. So yeah, that's it for now. Ciao.